Hello, poor people. How are you today? Tonight, I'm going to explain quickly the impeding factor behind your communication. As usual, the reason you should listen to me is because I bring a new approach as touching life's problem. So, what you're about to hear is not regurgitated concepts found on the internet, distilled with personal anecdotes and shoved to my audience. What you're about to hear is new horizon on the same subject. And that's the problem I have with people on the internet. They share the same solutions to the same problems. And if you sit and analyze as the average individual, yes, success might leave clue. And once there's a synonym to a problem of which you've applied consistently to no avail, you suddenly start to disbelieve yourself, not take action, spiral into doubt and hedonism. Whereas the real problem is the creators. I've given this analogy before, and let's use it again. If a child prepares for an exam with a wrong textbook, who's at fault? Exactly. The diligence is there, the passion is there, the will to pass the exam is, but with the wrong material. Therefore, the child is not to be blamed, the child is not to be hit. The person who presented the wrong textbook is at fault. So it's the same with you. Applying wrong solutions to no avail can affect your mindset. You persisted, you worked hard, you followed the solution down to the ladder, and yet the outcome is elusive. Please understand, people on the internet, when it comes to things that would improve their life, they are very meticulous. Very meticulous. They want to understand how you do it from the bottom top. If you say, for instance, you should read a book or read 5 books on a subject, they would very much love you to recommend the book, the kind of book. In fact, I was listening to a lady on communication the other day, and she said one of the ways to improve your communication is to journal. If you've gotten to this point of the video, and I quote, what kind of book should I journal upon? And she meticulously identified this kind of book, of which she proceeded to drop a link. That's how intentional people are when it comes to matters of life. So it's the same thing with you. Listen very carefully. Listen very carefully. Before I analyze the impeding factor behind your terrible communication, let's look at the benefits. Why should you strive to be a good communicator? Why should you learn oratory? Why should you try and master this skill? In fact, leading up to this context, I had to sit and analyze my own life. How has communication improved my life? Not just my life, my income as well. If you've been following me long enough, I've shared countless stories of how I was able to navigate XYZ situation as a consequence of good oratory. Therefore, I'm going to share a story I've not shared before. Geared towards finances, I believe it will make a more interesting story. I went to see XYZ and he took me to this big businessman. In fact, I had no idea that was the location. It's just like a friendly meetup. I went to see a guy. We talked for some time, we discussed business, and he took me to this place of which we had to spend 30 minutes. And I see this XYZ figure, shocked but composed. Finally, I was introduced to this man and we got into a conversation I was able to highlight how world wars affect the economy and how to hedge against wars, and if missiles ever attack this country, this would be the reaction, and here are safety measures. So if you look at it this way, there are things you can apply before the war in an attempt to be profitable. So we analyzed the economy from various standpoints, and not just was it analyzed, it was backed up by anecdotes, backed up by history, backed up with evidence and statistics. So the only reason that business was able to pull through was not just a consequence of knowledge, but good oratory. Good oratory. Because of that day, I made X amount. The point you should derive from this story is not the one you think, which is how good communication got me XYZ, but the fact that being ready to grasp opportunity when it presents itself is a very unique ability. Being proactive, able to handle situations as it presents itself, is a skill invaluable. Most of you, leading up to an interview, you prepare, you study, you listen to X, Y, Z, and there's nothing wrong in preparation. In fact, I'm a man of discipline. I'm a man of always taking actions that produce a desired outcome. So there's nothing wrong with preparing. I'm not advocating for laziness. However, like the situation I just shared, there are times where you might not be given the liberty of knowledge, or you might meet someone or opportunity just presents itself. If you're not a good communicator, you won't be able to identify as well as take it. Never upon that interaction was I told this man will do business with you, or we are going here, or when you meet this man, this is what to say. No, you just had a normal conversation, it went well. As a consequence, X amount popped up. One of the impeding factors behind your communication. Confidence. Lack of confidence. I know what you're thinking. How does confidence correlate to rhetoric? What does confidence has to do with anything? It's just like this statement: if you live an easy life, your life will be hard. If you do hard things, your life will be easy. Is in fact the case. Had you done things that led to the confident virtue, you would not struggle with communication. And I'll explain what I mean by this before we tie how confidence correlates to good communication. What makes a good communication, or what makes a good communicator? What does good communication look like? I believe these terms should be defined so we are not talking past each other. So what does good communication appear like? I'll tell you: the ability to utilize pause as well as speak vividly. Pause and speaking rhythmically. The fuck is wrong with my pronunciation? You know what I'm trying to say. Rhythmically. So pause and rhythmically. Let's start with number 2. The ability to speak in cadence is one of the most invaluable skills as touching communication. Most of you speak something like this: the car is black and I went there, and the car is black and the boat is blue and I went there and no. Or the car is black and I went there. All you're doing, in fact, the underlying factor behind the fidgeting and anxiety is lack of confidence. You somehow believe that those people will interrupt you, or you're wasting your time, or they are wasting their time. Therefore, you rush up your communication. You do not pause. You do not speak rhythmically. You do not take a cadence approach as touching communication. You just try and block out all the sentence, including creators. Most people would, especially at the infancy of their content, would try as much as possible to block out the opinion or to block out the reason for the day. They are scared of losing audience retention. It just cancels out, because in an attempt to retain audience, you sound like a fool. You sound like someone who's not worth listening to. If you've been following me long enough, you've probably heard this saying: you do not solve problems by solving problems. You solve problems by finding the cause of the problem and providing solution. Then the problem disappears. It's the same thing with communication. You might individually try to learn rhythmically or rhythm, cadence, tonality, and all of the esoteric concepts that concerns communication, or you adopt confidence and every single thing is a byproduct. Which is easier? Try to cut a tree by plucking out the branches, or decapitate the roots. Slowly but surely, all the branches wither. Which is easier? Exactly. Become confident. A cadent approach as touching communication becomes evident. Let's quickly pivot back to number one, which is pause. Pause, which still ties back to the absence of confidence. The silence is detestable, such that you rush in to feel or entertain your audience or listener with anything other than silence. That's why people use filler words in an attempt to recollect your thoughts. Instead of pausing, trying to recollect the thoughts, because you somehow believe if you pause, they interrupt or interject. That's absence of confidence at its peak. So my friends, how can you become confident? How you do the small things is how you do the big things. This micro leads to the macro. How you do the small things determines how you do the big things. One area will always spill into other aspects of your life. So once you're not confident, as I've astrictly highlighted, it spills into your communication. If you see someone you like, approach. Do not hesitate. Do not think. Say hello. Even as simple as saying hello and leaving, it's enough. You don't have to engage in hours of conversation. In fact, I'm not in favor of having your self-worth tied to externalities, which is, if I achieve the goal, I feel confident. If I get the girl, I feel confident. If the conversation goes well, I feel confident. In fact, to buttress on the idea of conversation, if you're trying to wait for the conversation to go well, it's most likely you are hyper vigilant in that interaction, which means, sir, your thoughts will be muddled. You will try as much as possible to refine the communication as they come. And in fact, anybody who has undergone this process understands perfectly trying to refine your communication as it comes out is one of the worst things you can do, because you're optimizing for the best words to come out. And guess how that sounds? You sound like a fucking fool. It sounds overt. Why do you think you dislike professors? Because their vocabulary are too high end. The habitat, the ovulation and the overflow, there's a way they conjoin their vocabulary. It appears as though this person is trying to impress you, which creates the opposite of the desired effect. So one of the things you should do is not refine your communication in the process. Not only would your thoughts be muddled, you sound stupid. Think of the best communicators. They use simple but punchy words. Simple but punchy words. How I speak on camera is different from how I would speak in an actual conversation, which is also different from how I would speak in a professional setting. In a more professional setting, which is also diluted into various cadence. Business meeting, trying to pitch, podcasts, they have various vocabularies associated with those levels. So for instance, I can say cadence or cadence as opposed to levels. Hierarchy as opposed to levels. So as you climb the ladder, you switch from a linear approach towards communication to a more metaphoric sense. Let's forget that that's intermediate level. That's intermediate level stuff. But you understand the point. The absence of confidence is ruining your communication. Fix it and you'll be fine. As always, my friends, a pleasure speaking to you. I'll see you in the next one.